So the first verse, of course, is the first verse, right? Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. And every child in Jewish day school learns with our beloved commentary from the medieval France known as Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, Rashi. And curiously enough, the opening commentary that Rashi has on the Torah is a very bizarre one when you think about it uh, objectively and when you think about it in historic context. So the verse goes like this. It's very famous. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, said Rabbi Yitzchak, is quoting a medrash. The Torah basically should have started from Egypt, from HaChodesh Ezalachem, announcing that Nisan is considered to be month number 1. It wasn't called Nisan at the time. We didn't go to Babylon yet. We didn't absorb those Babylonian months. But the Torah should begin where we receive the first commandment as a nation, the first mitzvah as a nation, HaChodesh Ezalachem. Okay, ma ta'am patach bebereshit. So why open the Torah with Bereshit, with in the beginning of the creation of heaven and earth and so on? Why do we need that? Very simple. Mishum koach ma'asa v'gid lamo letet lam nachalat goyim. There's a verse in Tehillim that says that God has announced his strength, his might to his people to give them the inheritance of nations. Okay? So what does this mean? This means Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. So this means she'im yamru umot haolam leYisrael listim atem, if the nations of the world shall say to Israel, you are a bunch of thieves who have conquered the lands of the 7 nations, they will say to them, the entire land belongs to God, because the creation story is supposed to prove that. Hu bera'ah, so God created it. And he gave it to the one who it is right in his eyes to give it to. So, God gave it to whoever he pleases. He gave it to them, took it from them, gave it to us, and everybody's happy. Can we go home now? Right? And the truth is that this is a very curious argument, because it seems to remain arbitrary, because it doesn't seem to give a justification for God, so to speak, usurping the land of the other nations and giving it to us. It's basically just saying God is the creator of the heaven and earth. He can do whatever he wants with it. Okay, but he's too big to argue, so we're just going to have to begrudgingly accept that. Like, what exactly is the argument here? And Ramban, Nachmanides, actually goes into a lengthier discussion on what this could mean, because this is an insufficient answer on that aspect. But I'm putting that aside. That's a conversation for discussing commentary. Think of the objective story, the story that he's telling objectively. The nations of the world will come to Israel and say, you are thieves. What does that actually mean? Right? We're so used to hearing Chazal speaking in this kind of language that we don't pause to think, wait a minute, what do you mean nations speak? Like, in what context? Where? In what setting? How does a nation express a will in such a way that it can gather with other nations and come to, like, what? Like, all of Israel is standing there and the world's pointing? Like, what exactly is the scenario? It is such a strange thing. The nations of the world, the flags, nation. The concept of nation as we think about it today is more or less an 18th century European invention, the idea of nationalism, right? And there are those who claim that Zionism is simply an expression of nationalism. It has nothing to do with the religion. Like, you can go back and forth on all these things that people are arguing pro and against Israel. I'm not getting into that. But the concept of a nation having an expression which can speak and represent the nation is a very novel idea, which is completely beyond the reality of medieval France. Right, when Rashi wrote his commentary, why would he think to write such a thing? What could this possibly mean? Right? So we have a lot of fun with this, right? And like with these pictures, with these ideas. Today we sort of take it for granted, right, that the world seems to have some sort of obsession with Israel. But I'd like to take us now to finally, this is a great picture, this one, but to take us to the United Nations, because the United Nations is, you could say, if you had to give it a name, it's called in Hebrew, Ha'umot HaMe'uchadot. But if you had to put a label on that I guess you can say, eschatological, esoteric, abstract idea that Chazal expressed, that Rashi puts down in his commentary on the very first verse in Bereshit. It's basically umot ha'olam, the nations of the world. The nations of the world now have a format and a forum for which to express their wills in an international setting. That itself is an incredible thing. This is the United Nations website, and you can see that what they're dealing with, what's on the side. Here's UNRWA, and I have a hard time pronouncing UNRWA. They're dealing with mourning our colleagues killed in Gaza, right? Like, this is what's on their mind. Now, there is an article that by Jake Simmons, which is it's behind a paywall, but it's worthwhile reading, by the Spectator, and it's talking about, like, getting into the statistics, the data, like really solid stuff, showing you that the United Nations is practically obsessed with dealing with Israel. And it's just an incredible sign of our times that we live in a world in which this abstract idea expressed in Rashi in this weird, bizarre kind of medrash it's just describing our reality. It's simply the reality we live in. Yes, the nations of the world get together, and all they can talk about is Israel is a bunch of thieves who stole the land from the Palestinians and their and occupation and all that stuff. And you sit there scratching your head. Like, in this article, he's talking about how there's people talking about the massacre of the Uyghurs outside, and inside, like, I'm sorry, we're gonna have to wait with that. The order of business has to be Israel. Like, seriously, have you nothing else to deal with? And it's an incredible thing. And while I'm not going to come here and give you a magical answer to why this is, I would like to examine a few key sources that deal with who are the people of Israel, the Jewish people, Israel, who the world is obsessed with, because it clearly has this historic context to it. You can't detach it from the history. Like, everybody who's involved knows that this really has nothing to do with a land territory. It's not a land dispute. It's not a territorial dispute. The territorial dispute is, if anything, an adjunct to a much deeper discussion. Now,